Hello everyone, this is Cheryl Lampard for Knitter Matters. I'm coming in a bit early. I just want to make sure you can all hear me. We had a few technical issues with the mic again today, so if somebody would just say whether you can hear me or not, that would be wonderful. As I say, I've come in a bit early, so we have time to do that before we really start. And then if you don't tell me, I should just have to carry on and assume that you can hear me. But if somebody could just let me know, that would be wonderful. I can't see who's popping up at the moment, so I will rely on my cameraman to let me know when you do pop up. Now it is 7 o'clock now. So, somebody has... Dawn? Oh, Dawn, hi. And Patricia, how are you both? I hope you're well. Just let me know if you can hear me. I'm assuming you can. Give us the thumbs up. Okay, we will start because it is 7 o'clock. So, welcome. Hey, thank you very much for confirming that. I really appreciate that. There's nothing worse than talking to myself and not having you hear me. Okay, well, this is season 2, episode 22. Welcome indeed to Knitter Matters. It's wonderful to have you here, whether you're watching live or the replay afterwards. I'm Cheryl Lampard. I'm an image consultant with my company Style Matters International. And throughout my life, apart from image consulting, knitting and sewing have been my two major passions. And knitting in particular is the thing that I do every day. It's my therapy. I love doing it. It calms me down and it creates beautiful things. I also used to be the proud owner of a yarn store in Brighton, England. And one of the great joys of owning a yarn store is that you get to be able to teach people how to knit. And it's even more of a joy now to be able to teach people how to knit because I can reach more people doing it via social media. So that's fantastic. And Helen has joined us. Welcome, Helen. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. I do appreciate every one of you that watches, whether, as I say, whether it's live or the replay. Thank you for taking your time out to be here. Okay, so, and I will try and say hello when names pop up. I can't see them, so I'm relying on being told who you are. But if you have any questions or any feedback, do put it in the comments. If I can't actually answer it while we're going along, and I will try if it's a really salient question, I'll get the cameraman to tell me what you say. Otherwise, I will answer as soon as possible afterwards. Okay, so today is all about my favourite top 5 tips. And Cynthia has joined us. How wonderful. Thank you for that. So we knitters are always looking at different ways of doing things. Sometimes we want an easier way of doing something that we find difficult. Sometimes it's just a quicker way. And Sue has joined us. Welcome, Sue. Sometimes it's just a quicker way. And sometimes we just have to think on our feet and find a makeshift way of doing something when we don't have all our tools with us. So today I'm going to cover my sort of top 5 favourite tips for things like that. So I'm going to ask the camera to move to the table and we'll get started. Okay, while we're moving. So the first thing I want to talk about, and Denise has joined us now, and that's great. Welcome, Denise. So the first thing I want to talk about is we get these loose stitches at the edge. Sometimes we get them across the row, and I showed you in the episode where I was doing double knitting, I said I was going to have some tension issues, and this is precisely the sort of thing, especially along the edge. Now, double knitting in itself, you know, there's tension issues with that until you really get going on it. And I did point those out when we did that. But just on this little piece of knitting here, you can see it's not this very edge stitch, but it's this second one in. And I've deliberately tried to make these worse than they might be. It happens, most of us have this at some point. Sometimes it's one edge only, sometimes it's both. But the question is, why does this happen? It helps to know what happens before we fix it. Well, it's all about the knitting tension, the personal knitting tension. It's not gauge, it's about the personal knitting tension. That's what causes it, and for a variety of reasons. Now, beginners often pull apart the needles. Let me get that bit of thread out of the way. So beginners often sort of do this and pull the knitting apart further. It's perfectly natural that knitters do that, but that causes extra yarn to sort of be taken up. And what happens, well, I'll tell you what happens in a minute. So the way to rectify that is to learn to knit closer to the tips of the needle. It takes a bit of practice, but if you knit closer to the tips of the needle without splitting the yarn like I did there, you don't tend to get that as much. I'm just going to unpick that because I want to be able to show you what we do to fix it in a minute. The other thing that sometimes people do is knit way down the needles here, and then it's a lot of work to get it. You're pulling the stitches here, and this is what happens. It's the row below. You're pulling that and stretching that. So what happens is it's actually created by the very stitch itself. I find my tension gets a bit out of whack when I knit with certain yarns, cotton, linen, anything without any elasticity, yarns that don't spring back. I really have to take care that my tension on the edges is equal across the row, because those yarns are a bit unforgiving. You get a lovely result, but they're unforgiving. So what do we do? How do we fix it? Let's pretend we haven't even started that row. So I said to you, even creating the stitch itself, as soon as you put another needle in, you're causing the yarn to sort of have to be pulled up, extra yarn. And then when you knit this transfers to the next stitch, and so on and so on. And that's why once you go across the row, that's all fine as it's going across the row, but once you get to the end of the row, it's got nowhere to go. So that leads us to the problem of big loops, but I'll come to that in a minute. But how do we fix this tension issue? Well, there's various ways. Oh, I have Louise Beale watching, and I can't read that name, but somebody, Corinne, is watching. That's wonderful. Welcome, welcome indeed. Sorry if I have pronounced your names wrongly. I'm trying to look at what I'm doing and look in the camera as well. Anyway, okay. So it's no good me just saying let's pull on the first stitch, because actually the yarn, all that's going to do is tighten the stitch sort of below, and that's not what we want to do. It's going to tighten this one and make this one look even worse. Now sometimes I do say tug on the first stitch, but that won't fix this issue. That's other things. Now the one thing you can do is you can work the first stitch with normal tension, then knit this one much tighter, and you might even have to knit the second one tighter too, or if you're purling, the same applies. So you could work those tighter. The other thing, I could go across the row, but for the sake of time I don't want to do that because we've got so many other things to get through. So my preferred way, and I like this one most of all because you can actually control this a bit more. So you would knit the first stitch, your usual tension, then the second stitch, instead of going over like that, if you're doing a knit stitch, you would wrap it the other way. The yarn is going to travel less far that way. Okay, let's do that again. Instead of doing it that way, you would do it that way. The yarn's not going to travel anywhere near as far, and you might have to even do it. So instead of going all the way round, we're going to go over the top. You might have to do it again for the third stitch. Now the only thing with that, when you do that, when you come back on the row, it's going to be seated, the stitch is going to be seated the wrong way round. But the easy thing there is just to either place it back on the needle the right way and then work it, or knit through the back of it. Okay, and clearly if you were purling instead of purling, I'm just turning this around so you can see. So you can see here the stitches are seated the wrong way round at the moment. But if you were purling that, instead of going that way round, you'd go that way round. Okay, so that will tighten up those two stitches. So that's a way of getting those stitches a bit firmer on the needle. And as you go across the row, then you won't have the problem of getting that unevenness. And sometimes you'll find it only happens on right side rows or wrong side rows. You need to just work that out and play with that. So leading on from that, another thing that happens, and most knitters are familiar with this, at some point you're going to get a big loop. when you bind off. Okay, this happens a lot. And even if you're really being careful about your tension along the row, and you see I have here been very careful about my tension, when you get to the end, the yarn, when you're walking along the row, it's being absorbed by the next stitch. But when you get to the end, there's no next stitch for it to be absorbed by. It's not connected to another stitch. So you get this gappiness. I've exaggerated this a bit so you can see it, but the principle is there. Okay, so how do we fix that? Well, I have shown this one before, but it's such a good tip. It's worth showing again. So what we do here, something we can do here, is I've bound off so far along the row. I'm going to get to the last stitch, and then I'll show you what to do. So I'd bind off as normal. Now I've got one stitch on my left needle and one stitch on my right. What I'm going to do now is just slip that stitch onto my right hand needle, because what I want to do now is find this stitch, this sort of V stitch, this V here, the row below. I'm going to pick that up from left to right and pop that on my needle along with my stitch. Okay, now I'm going to slip them both back to the left hand needle. I'm going to knit those two together, bind off as I would have done anyway, and fasten off. And if you're still concerned about it being loopy, you can always sort of guide the yarn down with the needle and then pull it off. But you can see that's a much nicer, squarer finish there than that. Hope you can see that. They're a bit curly. So this is the one with the loop. This is what we've just done. That's all you need to do to get a really nice finish like that. I bind off like that all the time. Okay. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is one of those that it's kind of, why didn't I think of this before? So I love a long tail cast on, but I don't love the guesswork for working out how much yarn I need for my long tail cast on. And if I've cast on, something like 100 stitches or more, and I find it's not enough, ripping it out and starting again is not fun. But here's a way to do it without playing yarn chicken. And for those of you that are not familiar with the term yarn chicken, it's really either when you can use it for long tail cast on when you run out, there's more stitches than you've got yarn for, or where you're binding off and again you've got less yarn than stitches. So it's a game of chicken. Who gets there first, the yarn or you? So when you do a long tail cast on, you don't want to have to keep ripping it out. There's nothing worse. So what you do for this, you either need a center pull ball of yarn or 2 balls of yarn. Now a center pull ball of yarn is when you can pull the yarn out from the center. If you've wound your yarn on a winder, or if you've had it wound in the shop, those will be center ball yarn. Otherwise, sometimes you can finagle with these sort of balls of yarn. Often when you pull them out, you get a lot of sort of what I call yarn vomit, but you can get there. Anyway, if you can't get a center pull piece of yarn out, then if you've got 2 balls of yarn because you're making a garment or whatever, use a second ball of yarn. But basically you want 2 ends of yarn. And I am going to just use this. So I've got my center pull there, and I've got the yarn end that just unwinds round the ball. Okay, it's from the same ball of yarn. All I'm going to do now is tie a slip knot in the usual way that we would do a slip knot, but with both pieces of yarn. Okay, now I'm going to put my needle on the slip knot. Whoops. And let's say I want to, let's tighten that up. I'm moving that out of the way so you don't see all that yarn. Okay, I'm going to cast on my however many stitches I want. Let's just do 8 stitches, and I'm going to ignore the slip knot. I'm doing the usual sort of slingshot long tail cast on here. And I'm going to ignore my slip knot. That does not count as a stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. So now I turn my work, and I've got to make a decision here. Do I want to continue? I've got to make a decision of which yarn I want to keep knitting with. Cameraman's getting annoyed with me because I'm going out of shot. Sorry about that, but the yarn's pulling me back. So I usually like to knit from the center pull. I always find that the yarn runs out more smoothly with that, but just for the moment, it's not going to really matter. But I've got to make a decision which one I'm going to use, and I'm going to cut the other one off. So with my scissors, you want to leave about 5 or 6 inches. I'm going to cut, which one is that? Okay, I think I have got the yarn from outside the ball of yarn. Doesn't matter if not, I'm going to, yes, I have. Well done me on that one. Okay, and I'm going to continue knitting, and let me show you now. I'm going to knit these stitches, and I'm going to show you what to do with that slip knot. So I'm just going to knit as normal, because remember I cast on in the normal way with the slingshot or my long tail cast on. Now I'm up to where my slip knot is, and all I do is take the needle out of that and pull it, and then I keep knitting. Once you've knitted, you've done your work, you can just weave those ends in. You're just going to have an extra end to weave in, that's all. Okay, but that's the way to do take the guesswork out of a long tail cast on. You do it with 2 strands. It works brilliantly. I don't know why I didn't think of this one before. I don't know where I found this tip. It's wonderful, but it's one of those that, why didn't I know this before? Okay, so that's a great way to do it. Let's get rid of that. So next thing, stringing beads. I had a question about this come into my mailbox. Now, stringing beads. So there's 2 ways to actually string beads. In season 1, episode 26, I showed you how to place beads on the knitting with a crochet hook. I haven't got that sample with me, but trust me, if you want to see that, it's there. Now the other way is to string them on first. And what happens, what you normally do, the normal way of doing this is you would, the normal way. The other way of stringing beads is to do it with a beading needle. I don't have a beading needle, I'm using a yarn needle, but this one is going to be too big. Even if I can get this yarn through there, I won't be able to get it through my bead. Let me show you, because the eye is too big. I'm not going to be able to do anything with that. So if I had a beading needle, the normal thing is that I would, this isn't a beading needle, it's just a finer yarn needle. And I know that I can get that past the eye just, okay. But what I can do here is I would put some sewing thread, just some cotton thread, or, just ordinary sewing thread, tie it in a knot. Then I would put my yarn that I want to thread on here like that. And then I would thread my beads along like that, however many I want, okay? But what if you don't have that with you? What if you've forgotten everything? What if you don't have it to hand? Well, you need go no further, actually, than your bathroom cabinet, because dental flossers are wonderful for this. And you need the sort that are joined. This one's like a sort of a little tennis racket kind of affair. This one goes under sort of, what do you call the training bridges, trainers, aren't they? Train tracks, or under under bridges. So you need them when they're joined. So all you do now is loop your yarn through like that. Now the edge of this, of course, is a little flexible, but it's still easy enough to do. And then you would just put your beads on like this. So if you don't have a beading needle you don't need them, you just need some dental floss. And dental flossers, I should say. And then you just pull them down onto your yarn. And you keep doing that until you've got the number that you want. And another quick tip here, if you've got a thread on lots and lots of these, rather than count them one by one, once you've done about 10, or this, depending on the size of the beads, if you measure how many millimeters, or quarter inches or inches, half inches there are, say it's maybe 10 to an inch, whatever it might be, then you can just measure how many beads you've threaded on in terms of inches or millimeters, whichever way you want to go. That saves you counting one at a time. Okay, so that's a quick and easy tip. I actually use these a lot, even when I have got my beading needles to hand. I just grab these. It's handy, it's easy. Okay, our last little tip tonight is, if you are traveling, or if you, oh, Nancy has joined us, how nice, and Stella, how lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. So let's say you're traveling or you're commuting. I understand that some airlines actually allow you to knit, which is wonderful. So if you're allowed to take your knitting items, or you're traveling, or even if you're going somewhere and you're doing a bit of knitting, waiting in the airport or in a train station or something, well, you certainly don't want your yarn rolling around on a dirty airport floor or a transit room floor. So it's a way of keeping your knitting project tidy while you're traveling on the move. Now, clearly you're not going to get sort of a massive blanket in this, but if you're working on small items, or enough to put in your handbag, but you don't want to get your yarn tangled up with your keys and everything, this is something you can do. So you just get hold of a Ziploc bag. This is just a small one, but yours could be bigger, obviously. What you want to do is get a hold of a Ziploc bag. You want to make a hole there through the bag. You can see I've just made a hole there. Then you want to cut just one side down, one side of the bag only, down to the hole. Pop your yarn in there, seal up the top, and that will still seal. And there you've got your knitting project. Your yarn is nice and clean. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to roll all over the place. There you go. You can keep it nice and tidy. And then you can just wrap that up with your needles, or pop that in your bag afterwards. But that's a really nice little trick for keeping your yarn under control and clean and tidy at the same time. So I hope that was helpful. So we've actually finished a bit early today. So I'm going to ask the camera to move back to me. I hope you found those knitting tips useful. I'm always seeing new ones. If you know of any that you'd like me to share, please let me know. Or if you have a problem that you'd like sorted out with a knitting tip, then do let me know, and I'll feature it in a future Knitter Matters episode. Okay. So thank you as always for watching. This episode can be found as season 2, episode 22. It'll be uploaded on the page afterwards and to our YouTube channel of the same name. So do subscribe to that if you'd like to know when new episodes are uploaded to it. And in the meantime, thank you again so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope there's at least one tip there that you didn't know about, or that you're going to find useful in your knitting. So in the meantime, stay well. Until next time, stay well, stay calm, and stay knitting. See you next time. Bye-bye.